Today's episode is brought to you by Modern Grower. Modern Grower is the go-to source for 100% organic, GMO-free microgreen seeds. Trusted by hundreds of growers for high quality and low prices. If you're growing microgreens, start saving at shop.moderngrower.co.
What about nature's cover crops? I mean, what about weeds? There is this huge idea in ag that weeds are bad. They don't fit into the system. And if you have low growing weeds, like a purslane or something like that, that's at the low, and you're growing corn where you're harvesting way above it.
Right.
Do you see any sort of competition, or is that a wrong that is just kind of came up through ag where those weeds need to be removed because they're not stealing nutrients away from the crop and maybe they're making the system better? What are your thoughts on weeds coexisting with cash crops?
Have you ever seen this book, Managing Weeds Without Poisons, by Charles Walters?
I think I've heard of that one. I have not read that one.
Yeah. So I think he's the founder of Acres USA. And then, of course, he refers to other things. And really what Charles Walters says is that weeds tell us about, they speak to us about what's happening in the soil. So going back to your question about purslane, something that would be a natural ground cover, theoretically, in between corn, I don't see would be a problem. I think it's a question of us learning how to understand weeds again, or weedy species, and they're there typically as a symptom of what's happening in the soil. I don't know that we should be just leaving weedy species out there if we're, say, doing row crops. But I think the definition of a weed is a plant out of place was something that allowed the development of chemicals, or not allowed but justified the development of chemicals. And I think that the better we understand weedy species and what they're telling us, the better we're going to be able to manage them. Again, if we have cows, that's not a problem. I would be hesitant to tell my row crop farmers just to leave the weeds going. One of the things that we have in the southeast would be henbit and chickweed, which are not very. So there's a big argument. Oh, just let the henbit and chickweed grow. And we can terminate that. And when you terminate those, there's basically nothing left. They just kind of meld into the soil. I'm not a great fan of them because they don't provide that much biomass, and they don't provide much ground cover either. But I would not rule out being able to look at some of the natural, quote unquote, weedy species that we have and see how do we fit those into our systems. Again, I've tended to be maybe a little bit narrow-minded on your conventional cover crop species without going into, say, what someone like Charles Walters has been talking about 50 years ago.
And you have that book by Charles, and I think some people look at that within ag and they say that's pseudoscience, it's a bit woo-woo. What's the current feeling or understanding in academia from your perspective of weeds? Are they a plant out of place, or do we have any sense of when weeds show up, this is why this particular weed is here?
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, I'm not from an agricultural school. I'm from a school of public health, so I come at it from a slightly different angle. I'm also not an ecologist, but if we had a more ecological understanding of weeds, I think that's going to be better for the farmer and the environment. If we have a purely production ag-related focus on weeds, that weeds just need to be gotten out of the way, and we need to grow our crops to the maximum yield at all expenses, including of the farmer, and that's a Wendell Berry quote. Then it's a whole different thing. So I I think a lot of it, again, this is just my thinking, a lot of it is just basically driven by money. You don't sell product if you say, well, let's figure out how we can work with Mother Nature. What plants are going to work with us, and how does this work? It just doesn't sell product. And that goes to, herbicides, pesticides, chemicals. And I'm not anti the use of, fertilizers and things like that. But I think, the scientific questions that have been asked often are skewed towards what would make the industry more money.
Hello, growers. Looking to turn your homestead into a profitable business? Or are you a farmer looking to boost your sales? Check out my book, Sell Everything You Grow. This book is the ultimate guide to choosing the right farm business model that fits your farm, time, and location. Discover which model has the highest profit margins and why diversification is so important. Whether you're selling apples, vegetables, or microgreens, Sell Everything You Grow will help you find your first market or expand into new ones. Get Sell Everything You Grow on Amazon and start selling more today.